Perfect. Okay, so the first slide is just a little bit of background. So every 5 years after the approval of an updated official plan, municipalities are required to review their official plan to ensure that policies are consistent with provincial policy and any legislation that may have been passed since the last time that the plan went through the review process, as well as to ensure that policies reflect the current needs of the community with respect to population projections, infrastructure, the level of growth experienced by the municipality, and other factors as well. The current review of the official plan was divided into 2 phases. The first phase of the official plan review dealt with issues such as growth and settlement, cultural heritage, natural heritage, and waterfront issues, as well as things such as local food systems. The second phase of the official plan, which is currently underway, will deal primarily with the transportation master plan, water and wastewater master plan, and economic development. So the changes that we're going to be talking about tonight were part of phase 1 of the 5-year review, which was adopted by Council on June 26, 2018, and then approved with modifications by the province on April 26, 2019. Zoning bylaws, which implement the policies that are within the official plan, must be updated to be consistent with those policies within 3 years. So that's why we're currently undertaking the zoning bylaw update process. And in fact, the shoreline related provisions did come into effect February 1st of this year. So in the next slide, I'm just talking a little bit about different shoreline zone classifications. So there are multiple zone classifications that apply to properties that may have shorelines. Generally around our lakes within the rural areas, the zoning would be a rural shoreline RS zone or a seasonal limited service zone. Within urban areas where there are municipal services, there such as Robinson Lake, some of the Long Lake properties, Nepwin, waterfront properties can be zoned things such as an R15. In other instances in rural areas, the zoning can be zoned RU. Just to explain some of the differences with the zone classifications. So for example, the rural shoreline zone, in most cases, they have most municipal services available. So this generally indicates that the road is maintained year-round by the city versus a seasonal limited service zone, which can indicate a variety of different things depending on the location in which lake the zone is applicable to. But generally speaking, it would mean that a road is not maintained year-round by the city, for example, and it might be maintained by a local roads board or association. And generally speaking, only seasonal dwellings are permitted on properties that are zoned SLS. But regardless of the zone classification, if the property abuts a water body, it is considered a shoreline property, and these provisions would apply. Oh, looks like we're missing a little bit of the wording here, but this next slide, I was just going to speak a bit about what is a shoreline buffer area. So a shoreline buffer area is an area of open land abutting a shoreline. It's maintained in a naturally vegetated, self-sustaining state, which can include natural rock formations. But for clarity, this does not include an area that's maintained as a lawn. Oh, there's the text. Okay, on to the next slide. So why maintain a shoreline buffer area? So there's multiple reasons why we want to maintain shoreline buffer areas along our lakes. The City of Greater Sudbury aims to protect surface water quality through management of development on shorelines of lakes, rivers, and streams. And the shoreline buffer area can help filter sediments and other pollutants such as fertilizers and pesticides from runoff that flow from the land into waterways, thereby protecting the waterways from nearby land uses. The shoreline also provides critical habitat for aquatic insects, microorganisms, fish, and other animals, thereby helping to maintain a balance for sensitive aquatic ecosystems. The shoreline buffer area also reduces erosion and the need for hardscaping, for example, installing a stone retaining wall adjacent to the water body. Across the province of Ontario, Consistently, they're increasing the setback requirements for shoreline development as municipalities are updating their planning documents. So the documents would be the official plan and the zoning bylaw. In Greater Sudbury, as I mentioned earlier, this new setback requirement was introduced through a provincial modification to the official plan when it was updated in 2019. So this was something that the municipality was anticipating that the province would be looking to increase the setback. The city had proposed a 20-meter setback, but a 30-meter setback was imposed by the province. So the next slide, we'll just talk a little bit about what are the current buffer requirements. So there are different standards for buffer requirements on lakes and rivers versus streams. Shoreline buffer of 20 meters is required for development adjacent to a lake or river. And the zoning bylaw defines rivers as the main channels of the Vermilion, Wanapitei, and Onaping rivers. A shoreline buffer of 12 meters, which was what the zoning bylaws were prior to February 1st, is required for development adjacent to permanently flowing streams. So those streams are permanently flowing natural water courses that are not a river. But this definition does exclude roadside ditches, small drainage ditches that are internal to established or proposed development projects. Additionally, it does not include municipal drains. On a residential lot, a maximum of 25% of the required shoreline buffer area can be cleared of natural vegetation to a maximum of 276 meters squared. But in no case can the length along the shoreline of this cleared area exceed 23 meters. There is one slight difference for commercial lots. In those instances where it's owned commercially, up to 33% of the required shoreline buffer area can be cleared. So what structures are permitted within the shoreline buffer area? So this slide is just showing a few images of the types of structures that are permitted within that area. So generally speaking, accessory structures that are directly related to shoreline use are permitted. So things such as gazebos, boathouses, docks, decks, stairs, water pumps, and saunas are permitted within the shoreline buffer area. So that's within that 25% that can be cleared up to a maximum of 276 meters squared. Development on waterfront lots outside of the shoreline buffer area. So this slide is indicating, so the shoreline buffer area is 20 meters back from the high water mark. And then there is a new 30-meter setback for non-shoreline structures. So that would be structures such as your camps, or in urban areas, it would be your dwelling or your house, sleep camps, garages, and sheds would all be required to be set back 30 meters. Adjacent to a permanently flowing stream, again, there's a little bit of a difference there. Still, the setback for primary structures adjacent to a stream is 12 meters. One thing I didn't mention on the previous slide was septic systems. So septic systems, including the leaching bed, which is essentially the pipes in the ground, must be set back 30 meters now from the high water mark of a lake, river, or permanently flowing stream. Okay, so as I noted earlier, these changes did come into effect on February 1st, so just last week. Although they have been in policy or enshrined within our official plan since 2019. The amendments to the zoning bylaw were initiated in 2021 by staff, and we did go through a communication program through our communications department. So we have undertaken a number of consultation sessions with the community to provide them with additional time to advise their clients. So we did communicate with our development liaison advisory committee, which is comprised of members of our development community, be they architects or other consultants, so that they could begin advising their clients appropriately. Likewise, our building services department has been advising their clients of these changes. We did hold a series of open houses, I believe it was last May or last June, to communicate these changes to the public as well. So when the amendments were just introduced to Planning Committee and Council last May, so that's the very specific technical language that was proposed to be introduced to the zoning bylaw, Planning Committee did opt to provide an additional 6 months for the amendments to take effect, so that those that were in the process of developing a development plan for their property or undertaking the building permit process, they would have time to perhaps wrap up that process before the in effect date of February 1st. Okay, so the next slide, development on lots with constraints. We do recognize that within the city of Greater Sudbury, there are of properties that may be restricted with respect to their overall size or area, topography on the property. They may have rock outcrops or other features that make them less readily developable. They may have less frontage than what is currently required by the zoning bylaw or in a regular shape. Whether things that are also taken into consideration, whether a proposed structure is within an area that has already been cleared. So on this slide, I wanted to speak a little bit about the minor variance process. I know that we did receive a number of questions from the group as well, in particular about the minor variance process. So I just wanted to speak a little bit about that here. So with respect to the minor variance process, each variance is different, and its approval depends on a combination of what is being proposed as well as the configuration of the site. So every application is looked at in terms of its own setting and on its own merit. There are 4 tests that are applied under the Planning Act, and these 4 tests are: is the application minor in nature? Is it desirable for the appropriate development or use of the land, building, or structure? Is it in keeping with the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw? And is it in keeping with the general intent and purpose of the official plan? For example, this means that what may meet the threshold of the test for a minor variance in one location may not meet the test for a minor variance in another location. So it's very, very site specific. And again, one opinion on one application doesn't directly translate to another property, even if it is on the same lake. So for example, there are lots of properties on any given lake that are oversized, and there can be an equal number of properties on the same lake that are undersized. So there's lots of properties where compliance is very easy to achieve, and lots of properties where compliance may be very difficult or onerous for the property owner. And the city does see all types of development across the city, not just on water bodies, but anywhere in the municipality. So a single hearing on a matter doesn't necessarily define or translate elsewhere on a given lake in terms of what is or is not considered a minor variance and what committee will or will not do. So another comment in that respect is that staff does make a recommendation to the Committee of Adjustment, who assesses the applications for minor variance, but ultimately the decision rests with the Committee of Adjustment. Next slide. So this slide is just a few different scenarios to sort of illustrate the differences in how we would assess a minor variance application. So in the first scenario, you have an existing dwelling that is already encroaching within the shoreline buffer area, and there is a proposed, and it is located partially within the required 30-meter setback area. And in this instance, so there, I guess, to go back a step, there are instances where, for example, an addition to an existing dwelling would necessitate a minor variance, and there are instances where a minor variance may not be required. In scenario A, the variance may be required because the proposed addition is within the 30-meter setback and you're increasing the square footage within that area, versus scenario B, where you have an existing dwelling which is located partially within the 30-meter setback, but the proposed addition is fully outside of the setback area. In that case, in all likelihood, a variance would not be required unless there was some other activity taking place either within the shoreline buffer area or within the 30-meter setback. With respect to timing for minor variances, generally they take 1 month to process, so they are a fairly quick process. There was a few other questions that I'll just address too with respect to minor variances. There was a question about whether or not lake stewardship groups would be able to be notified of minor variance applications. And my understanding in speaking with staff that deals with the Committee of Adjustments that we as the city have been providing a fairly consistent response that stewardship groups would have the same method of accessing information as the regular public does. So that would be through the regular circulation process. And we wouldn't be able to circulate the groups separate notification as if it's using the same methods as if you were an agency, a department, or a resident that was adjacent to the property. So notices provided through the Sudbury Star as well as Le Voyageur, as well as courtesy mailouts to the area residents that are within the 60-meter radius of the lands that are subject to the minor variance. With respect to fees, which was another question for 2022, the application fee plus legal notice fee would be $1,025. An additional $300 would be applied if it needed to be circulated to Conservation Sudbury. And if it was within a source protection area, there would be an additional $35 fee.
Excuse me, can everybody be on mute, please? Somebody's got some distortion going on. Thank you.
Great.
Sorry, Melissa.
Sure, that's fine. I was just looking at the list of questions again that I received from the group. There was a question that was asked about a case study where a lakefront property had an old footprint of a previous structure that was located within the vegetative buffer. If the footprint was an old tennis court and the asphalt was still there, could a service building be erected on this location? Could an application for variance be filed? In this case, again, we'd really want to see a conceptual plan, which could be something, a very rough hand-drawn sketch that shows the setbacks of any and all existing structures, including the footprint of the tennis court. We'd want to see information about what vegetative buffer exists on the property. In this example, would building in the footprint of the old tennis court necessitate clearing another area on the property? So we'd really want to run through the scenario and base it on a site-specific property. So unfortunately, we can't really provide a yes or no answer. Everything, again, is very case-specific. The next slide is just wanted to speak generally about enforcement along the water bodies. So anywhere within the geographic boundaries of the city of Greater Sudbury, you can call 311 anonymously if you do observe somebody clearing or building or constructing on the property and you're not certain that it does comply with the zoning bylaw. Complaints are, or we do respond to these on a case-by-case basis. They can be anonymous. They would be investigated by city bylaw enforcement staff. And then depending on the nature of the infraction, city bylaw staff would involve staff from other departments. So that would be planning department, building department, potentially conservation Sudbury, or the health unit. So depending on, again, the nature of the infraction, the appropriate departments or agencies would become involved. We do see education generally as the first step and hope that, you know, it can be resolved simply through discussions with a property owner if an infraction is observed. In a worst case scenario, bylaw could issue an order to comply, and in a very worst case scenario, we could proceed to court. But generally speaking, we try to resolve these complaints through an education process. Part of education, we have developed a new shoreline development webpage. So I provided the link here in the presentation, and hopefully the link will work, and I'll just quickly walk you through the shoreline development webpage. So on this webpage, we have general information about what the new setback requirements are, information on why maintain a shoreline buffer area, information about what portions can be cleared on any residential lot as well as commercial lots, the structures that are permitted. And we do have a series of frequently asked questions. So these are the common ones that that we see come up, and this is a lot of the information that I provided in this presentation is available through the FAQs as well. And we do have information on what permits are needed, a general description of those of the permitting requirements. And I think I have a slide on that earlier, so I won't go into too much detail there, as well as additional shoreline information and resources. So these are links to some of our other city programs, the shoreline classification, lake water quality program, fertilizer bylaw, official plan, as well as zoning bylaw, a copy of the amending bylaw with the most recent amendments, as well as links to some of our partner agencies. Okay, so what permits are needed? Generally speaking, within the city of Greater Sudbury, if you're constructing anything that's over 10 meters squared, so 108 square feet, you do need a building permit. In addition to the building permit, building services would assess whether or not you comply with the zoning bylaw requirements with respect to setbacks, heights, lot coverages, permitted clearing within the shoreline buffer area. So they're your primary contact when it comes to building permits. If you're really located with an NDCA regulated area, you'll need to contact Conservation Sudbury as well. So they regulate development in and along environmentally sensitive areas such as floodplains, steep slopes, wetlands, shorelines, and waterways. And the third agency that the majority of the time when you're constructing on a shoreline, you'll need to contact Public Health Submarine Districts. They do administer Section 8 of the Ontario Building Code, which pertains to septic systems. So I think that's it. I hope through the presentation that I did cover off the majority of the questions that, that I did receive from the group. But happy to answer any questions that I missed. And again, thank you very much for having me here tonight.
Great, super, Melissa. Thanks. Great visuals. I understood everything, so majority of the people here should be able to understand it if I did. I guess, how do we open questions up? I guess we go to a split screen, and let's ask Melissa 5 or 6 questions. We've got a busy agenda, and I think Melissa covered a lot and has a lot of information on the city website. But if you guys want to ask a question, I see Ruth DeBicky. Did you want to ask Melissa a question?
Sorry, I was on mute. No, I didn't have my hand up or anything, so.
Norm here, Alex.
Okay, I see it on the, you got a hand up on the, oh, maybe it was John. Okay, Norm, sure.
Thanks, Melissa. I think just a comment, I believe on the city website, you can see building permits and variances on the website itself by clicking on there. It shows the different areas, different zones of the city where you can click on, and it shows the applicant name and the, I don't think it shows the outcome, but it shows there's a permit taken on it. It's under the zoning or somewhere. I think that's accessible. I guess my question is, is there a grandfather clause for either existing field beds there's quite a few older camps where I live, and also where my camp is. There's field beds and original cabins that were built right on the shorelines. Is there a year cutoff, or does everything go backwards from February of 22 of this year? Say, for instance, if they were to rebuild, they wouldn't do it. But I mean, right now there's existing field beds within that, like some of them are 60 feet from the water. Is there a year cutoff, or is it just a one-off sort of thing?
Generally speaking, when it comes to replacement and repair and construction, there are provisions in the zoning bylaw that allow you to do that in most cases, unless you are, for example, in the example of a primary structure, unless you are increasing the gross floor area or further decreasing an insufficient setback.
Yeah.
In speaking with the health unit, they will be amenable to taking it at a case-by-case basis. So where you have an existing septic system that's within that, in all likelihood, you would be able to replace within that area. But the hope is that over time, we're going to see more of the new septic systems, and if a complete replacement of a field bed is required, that it would comply with the new setback requirements. So there is, where there's existing situations, the agencies will be willing to work with property owners.
Thank you.
Okay, great. John Lindsay. John, you have to unmute, please. I think you have your hand up. John? Okay, not sure what's going on with John's communication system there. Does anybody else have a question before?
Got my hand up, Alex.
Tom, you're?
Yeah, Melissa, I am assuming, or is it fair to assume that the 30-meter setback from the high water mark is a horizontal component of measurement and not an upslope measurement? Is that true?
That's true. It's a horizontal distance between the high water mark and the structure, the setback.
Okay,
not on a horizontal slope. Yes.
thank you.
Okay, I think Susan is next, then Mary. Susan?
Thanks. I wondered, Melissa, when you were talking about the test you use, when you look at a case, there were 4 things, and the first one is whether the request is minor or not, and what determines if something is not a minor variance.
Yeah, so just to speak to that question, so when we speak of something minor, it isn't necessarily a numerical thing. So we can't say, for example, that, set a request for a 25-meter setback versus a 30-meter setback. Yes, that's always minor in nature. The test doesn't really work that way. So when we look at whether it's minor or not, we are taking definitely into consideration all of those factors that I discussed earlier. So are there any other options? What's preventing somebody from meeting the 30-meter setback? A 25-meter setback may be minor in an instance where you're fully restricted by a vertical rock wall that's at the 27-meter mark and doesn't leave you any option to get, to meet that 30-meter setback requirement. So it's not something that's numerical.
Okay, great. Mary Henderson.
Hi, Melissa. Great presentation. There had been some talk about when you got a permit for a building on a lake or anywhere, I guess, in the city, that there was going to be a site plan agreement that was usually used only for commercial properties, in order to make sure that once somebody did what they said they were going to do, didn't a year from there do something different, and that it was going to be followed up. The site plan agreement was going to be followed up to make sure that it was adhered to by the homeowner on the lake. So do you know if there's anything going to be happening in that regard?
So I think, yeah, and I see Stephen popping up now, and I think maybe that's a question that Stephen would be best to respond to.
Okay, thanks.
So in order for that to happen, there has to be an amendment to the site plan control bylaw. The intention is, now that the zoning bylaw provision has been passed and approved, that we move towards the next step, which is the amendment of that site plan control bylaw. And that would apply to all shoreline lots. So if somebody comes in for a minor variance or a consent, then they would be under site plan control. So if they come in virtually for any planning application, they would be put on a site plan control. They would be required to have a site plan control agreement, sorry.
So is that going to be something that will happen? Like, is it going to take another 5 years for that to happen?
No, I suspect that it would be within, if not this year, then early next year.
Okay, thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen. Next, Richard Witham.
Thanks, Alex. Melissa, I know that one of the questions that we had put on was whether or not the link to the description of the shoreline setback could be included in a minor variance application. Do you know if that's possible to put in? Because I would think that a lot of people who may already have constructed properties on water sheds or in watersheds and on water bodies may not be aware of the importance of the setback, and may in fact go into the, make an application to the Committee of Adjustment, having no idea how that works and why the importance is. And I'm just wondering if there's some way we can highlight the importance of that, the shoreline border.
Right. Thank you for reminding me of that. So there were a few questions around the minor variance application form as well as the website. So I did speak with Nia Lewis, who is the Secretary Treasurer of the Committee of Adjustment. They are quite willing to make a few changes to the application form. So I think there was a request for additional information about what specifically would be required in a sketch for a minor variance dealing with shoreline development. So they've indicated that, yes, they can make that change to the application form and that they would be willing to include the link to the shoreline development webpage as well. In terms of timing, they didn't really want to commit, but within the short term, I'm assuming within the next few months, you will be able to see those changes made.
Great, that's really good news. I just had another question. The members of the Committee of Adjustment, they're appointed by council, I believe.
Right, so they are members of the public, and Stephen, maybe you have a bit of input. I believe there are 5 members of the public that form the Committee of Adjustment.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the exact number, but yeah, they are appointed by council for that position.
Yeah, I think there were 5 with the chair, but I think the chair is from the city. So I'm not sure. I think maybe 4 of them were appointed, but I did want to just make a couple of comments. The first is that I had the opportunity to attend a Committee of Adjustment meeting, and there was an application that an individual had brought forward for a minor variance, and city staff had assessed it, and it didn't comply to any of the 4 principles that are stated there. And the city staff recommended that it be turned down. And a couple of the members of the committee agreed with city staff, but there was one individual on the committee who didn't see a problem and thought that the development should go ahead. So this is an application that scored 0 out of 4 on the objectives that they're supposed to assess. It was recommended to be turned down. And that individual on the Committee of Adjustment didn't think that it needed to be stopped. So I would like to, and because the city, in fact, doesn't have the staff to really monitor people who may not be adhering to the bylaws. So it can only be investigated if people actually complain and call into 311, or attend, the Committee of Adjustment meeting and ask to have stature, that people who are on water bodies may want to take a much closer look to what's going on with the Committee of Adjustment and what's happening there. If they're really seriously interested in the development on shorelines, and not to make it too serious, but in terms of what's going on in our society today, it seems to be that people think that their freedoms cannot be restricted in any way, then in fact, we may have a lot more people who think that they have the right to sort of go ahead and do whatever they want and not follow bylaws. And I would hope that that doesn't happen, but it sure hasn't been looking very good given what we've seen in the public the last couple of weeks.
I put in the chat the link to the actual Committee of Adjustment, and you can see the upcoming agendas. There's one a couple of days from now, and as they're posted. So there is also a meeting on February 24th, but the agenda for that hasn't been posted yet. So
thanks, Stephen. I think it's important that stewardship groups keep apprised of what's coming up in their respective areas with respect to the Committee of Adjustment.
Some interesting comments, Richard. Thank you very much, and Stephen. Anybody else with questions? I may have one for Taylor Menard, and I guess the usual shoreline buffer plant programs, and I forget which ones, Love Your Lakes, etc. Are they still in play for 2022? And is there anything new from your department, Taylor and Stephen?
Speaking for the Love Your Lake program, so that's the shoreline assessment program. Just for those of you who may not be aware, that program hasn't been done on your lake. That is going ahead again this year. So I think there's 2 lakes so far there. Still have not yet finalized everything, but yeah, that's still going on as well. So that's the update for that anyways. Oh, and then sorry, just another aside, since I have everybody here and there's a lot of stewardship groups in attendance, I did recently send out the Lake Stewardship Grant Program applications for 2022. So just check your inboxes for that. I did send those around last Friday. And if you haven't gotten those applications and guidelines, you can just reach out to me and I can send you those for sure. And those are due on the 11th of March. So we get 5 weeks to complete those.
Super, yep. Richard Lake received theirs. Thank you very much. Just quick question, how many lakes received a $500 grant last year?
It was mixed between I think it was 10 or 11. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, something like that.
Okay, good, super. Okay, great. Anybody else with last question? Okay, super.
I just want to maybe say,
sorry.
just Alex, if you oblige me for a moment, I just want to make sure that, so we've conveyed to you tonight the zoning bylaw provisions that apply to shorelines. We've spoken over the years, maybe not directly to the Greater Sudbury Watershed Alliance, but certainly through the Watershed Advisory Panel of the shoreline matters are generally handled as it's a distributed portfolio. So we have, as you know, Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. We have Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. We have Conservation Sudbury. We have the municipality, and we have Public Health Sudbury and districts, all having a role to play in various aspects of shoreline living, if you will. So we certainly don't want to leave you with the impression this evening that anything, either the zoning bylaw provisions or the upcoming site plan control bylaw, are going to fix all the problems, are going to be a panacea. As you know, staff, we are challenged in terms of being able to, we don't have a policing force. Some smaller municipalities in other areas, certainly in Quebec, have a couple of lakes that they look after, so they're able to have staff person that goes around and essentially, polices what people are doing on the lake. That becomes very difficult for us to do. So as Melissa spoke to the idea of the complaint driven. And the other item that we currently don't have that would benefit some of the, I guess, problems that occur on shorelines is a tree cutting bylaw. So that may be something not necessarily in the near future, but certainly something upcoming that may be in discussion, so that we have several arrows in the quiver. But Melissa made the good point that really ours is, we definitely prefer the carrot than the stick. And we really want to make people understand the benefit that really you're protecting your lake. You're doing these things to protect your own interests, not necessarily, even if you're a selfish individual, you're really doing it out of selfishness to protect your own interests, your property values, your water quality of your lake. So, and that's an important message. I think that's often forgotten is, people think about their house, they think about their view, and that's pretty much it. But really there's other aspects that come with that. Unlike other property development maybe that don't have the downstream effect, living on the shoreline, whether it's a river or whether it's a lake, does have a community aspect to it. And if only just to protect the very interests that you actually enjoy. So that's sort of our first go-to, is really a carrot-driven approach. We see examples in Muskoka, for example. There's properties that have been handed down generation to generation that seem to have an ingrained respect, maybe, although that may be too big of a word, but a respect for keeping the integrity of the value that's being handed down through the generations, right? So grandfather used to own that, now father owned it, and now I'm owning it, and my kids will own it. And we want to maintain the Muskoka look. We don't want it to be despoiled by having a look of suburbia on the property. And there seems to be a social understanding, a social, contract, if you will, that no one is going to, tear down all the big white pine trees in order to plant begonias. So that's the type of carrot that is kind of has the most influence moving forward, is that there's a social understanding that that's what's expected if you live in this area. It takes time, obviously. We spoke about, generations, but that's really what we're aiming to do. And with the tools that we do have, that would be more of the stick, we hope to be able to do some enforcement in that way as well. But I don't want to leave this evening thinking that this is going to be, a new task force, a new police force set up in Greater Sudbury to protect shorelines. It's really everyone's responsibilities, and we certainly want to send the message. I know this evening I'm preaching to the choir, but to others that may own a property on a lake, is that we're looking after, even though it looks like we have regulations and this and that, it's really looking after the very interests for which you bought your property in the first place. So I just wanted to leave that with you so that there's no misunderstandings moving forward. So.
No, some good comments there, Stephen. Yeah, for sure. No, we understand. There's some limitations and some challenges that the city has, especially in the COVID environment. One thing I know, it's very, we use technology more, but if you ever developed any pamphlets on Shoreline, and we'd be happy to pass that on through our stewardships. I don't have all the email addresses of our neighbors, and I know at Richard Lake, we're hoping to pass on a calendar in the next year or so. And it would be if you had something on this topic that we can hand out to educate residents on Richard Lake shorelines, we'd be happy to do that. If you had something, and I know we've done that in the past with for ice fishing huts, etc. You've done a super job in the education part of it. So
I appreciate those comments. I'm pretty sure Taylor's taking notes on that, because if we can do, those cards are ideal, those sort of info cards that we have, because they're easy to pass out. And we can still put enough information that makes it simple to read, but compelling to read, right? And that's important as well. The other thing that's happening is that there's going to be a transfer over the next year or so to another face to the Earth Care Minute. That'll be another person, and it will be Jennifer Babin-Fensky, who is our coordinator of climate change. And she's going to be the face of Earth Care Minute. So there's opportunities there to bring new messaging out as well on specifically shoreline living. So we have had a number, but we can certainly do more.
Sure.
And really make them again compelling, and just keep the message going. One thing I learned through the Sudbury soil study in terms of messaging is high frequency, low intensity. Just keep the message going, and after a while, people become attuned to it. They don't necessarily tune it out, but they become accustomed to it and realize that that's the social norm that we should be doing. So I always say when it hits the Tim Horton crowd, and that's the discussion that takes place on those Saturday morning with the Tim Horton gang, then you know you've kind of reached a pretty good level in terms of communication penetration. So,
super, fantastic. Well, I'd like to thank everybody from the city, Melissa, Stephen, Taylor, and Bailey on her first day.
Sorry, Alex, I don't want to interrupt your flow. Susan might have had a
sorry,
question.
Susan, I missed it. Susan, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just earlier going to support the point Richard was making about the application form that people must fill out, that we had probably more than a question. It was almost a suggestion for the form. And I appreciated, Melissa, that you said you've already spoken to Nia and that they're quite willing to make some changes. What I wanted to support about what Richard said was really clearly marking on any form or drawings the high water mark, since it is so key to determining setback and buffer zones. It should be really prominent on anybody's drawing. And on the drawings we happen to see at a recent Committee of Variance meeting, understandably, probably it was played down. I'm sure sometimes when people are applying for a variance, they're wanting to bend the rules a bit, and maybe they don't want to pay that much attention to the high water mark, but it should have to be very clear on any drawings that they submit. So that was kind of part of our suggestion to the several suggestions we made about the application form. I just wanted to kind of reinforce that point. Thanks, that's all.
Sure, absolutely. I think there was a couple things. There was the high water mark that had been mentioned in that question, as well as clearly indicating the 20-meter setback for the shoreline buffer area and the 30-meter setback for development. And I think those are the three elements that Nia will be working to incorporate in the checklist for any future sketches that are submitted as part of a variance application. Yeah.
Super. Great. Okay, guys, well, this concludes Melissa's great presentation. I'm going to give